Couples fight, relationships strain, and sometimes break, but why? I think we assume that it's because we found the wrong person, we've lost the chemistry, the love's not there anymore. But what if the real issue isn't your relationship with that person, but your relationship with stress, right? In a fast-paced, pressure-filled world, are we mislabeling the problem? And I think we might be mislabeling the problem, and I want to give you an example of how I've experienced this. When we were pastoring a church in New York City, there was a woman that was a part of our church who did acupuncture for a living, and she had this beautiful office in Brooklyn that overlooked the Brooklyn Bridge. It was incredible, and I remember talking to her because I went to see her, and yeah, I did the thing where you got the big needles and things in your body. It's crazy. They stick them in your forehead. It's pretty nerve-wracking, but I remember talking to her and just asking her about her, her service and whatnot. And she said that she, since she moved to New York, she's originally from Nashville. She moved to New York. She was treating a lot of women for infertility. And she said, it was one of the things that was listed on her site. And she said, hey, can I just tell you something? I said, sure. She said, they're coming in because they're having infertility issues. But she said, all I'm doing is treating them for stress. She said the same thing I would treat for someone who said they're just experiencing a lot of stress. I'm doing the same exact treatment. And what she said was there was so much stress mentally and emotionally that it was starting to affect them physically. And she said the moment she would treat them for stress, she said most of her clients who were coming in for infertility, they would get pregnant in a matter of like 3 months. And I just found that so interesting because I think we might be mislabeling the problem when it comes to relationships as well. And I wonder if what's pulling you apart isn't even between you and the other person. Right? If you're taking notes, the title of our message for week 1 is The Real Fight. The Real Fight. How many of you have had a great day at work and you're in a good mood? You're leaving work in a great mood, right? That maybe rarely happens, but it happens for you. And you get home and you're excited because you've had such a great day at work and you start to envision this great relaxing night, right? The rest of the day, and you walk through the door, and as soon as you walk through the door, all of that goes out the window. Anybody ever have a moment like that, right? So I remember this week I was here at the church and I came home, had a great day, met with some people and just really encouraging stories, stuff that like keeps you going, like, man, I can keep doing this for another, I don't know how long, but like, man, that's the stuff that you rarely get to hear, and it's just so life-giving. And so I was in a great mood, and I'm thinking, like, I think the Lakers are playing tonight, so I get to watch the game, get to relax. And then I open the door, and my son is sitting in the living room, and as soon as I open the door, he looks at me, and I could tell by the look on his face that everything I envisioned about a relaxing night was gone. Right? So he's got that face where he's been crying, his face is all red, and he's got that guilty look like he knows why he's been crying because he hadn't been listening. And then Tess comes in, and without even saying anything, she just looks at me, and I could tell by the way that she looked at me, what she said was, he's been terrible, it's your turn. And I think we've all been there, all right? We've all been there. Maybe for you, it was when you walked in the door, your spouse immediately snapped at you, right? Or maybe they immediately started rattling off the to-do list of things that you said you were gonna do, but you haven't done, right? Maybe for you, if you're like me, you don't put things on the calendar like you should, and then you forget to tell your spouse about the thing that you said y'all were gonna do together, even though you didn't ask her if she was free or if she wanted to do it, and then you have to break the news because she thought she was gonna have a relaxing night off. And then you have to remind her, well, actually, we got to go to this thing because I said we were going to go to this thing, right? That's me, right? Whatever it is, I think we've all been there. And when you experience that, you feel blindsided, you feel overwhelmed with your frustration rising as the night that you had hoped for clearly is not going to happen. And almost instantly, you're in a fight, right? And it feels inevitable. One that won't just end tonight, and one person feels attacked. The other feels like they're drowning, and neither gets the support that they actually need. And when this happens occasionally, it's frustrating. But when it becomes the norm, it feels like your whole relationship is just a fight waiting to happen. And so how did we get here? Maybe you start to notice that your relationship is comprised more and more of these four things. I want to give them to you really quick. If you're taking notes, you can write them down. The first is criticism, right? Attacking the person instead of attempting to solve the problem, nitpicking, sarcasm, and unfair labels. And while we have a little bit of fun this morning, as I go off of these, read these four things, as I get to the one you struggle with, why don't you stand up, okay? I'm kidding, don't do that. Don't do that, don't do that. The second one is defensiveness, right? Justifying your behavior by shifting blame and deflecting responsibility, right? If you struggle with defensiveness, and we all do to some degree, there's always an excuse for what happened, right? There's always another reason that has nothing to do with you that something happened. The third is stonewalling, shutting down and shutting your partner out, right? Avoiding topics, refusing to explain, staying busy, withdrawing, and resisting compromise. The fourth and last one is contempt, assuming that all conflict with someone is due to their lack of character, right? And so when it's contempt, you dismiss any good that that person might actually be doing because you don't see a way that they could do any good, right? And so we all fall into these patterns occasionally, but when they become our default, our relationship is truly in danger. Maybe one of the most well-known relationship experts that I believe has ever lived goes by the name of Dr. John Gottman. He calls those four things the four horsemen because he says when you see those things in a relationship, it's a signal that it's about to collapse. But you don't need research to tell you that. Many of you can probably feel it slipping away right now, wondering if you picked the wrong person, if the chemistry is gone, or if this is just how it's gonna be. Maybe friends start to notice that something's off, but when they ask what happened, you struggle to explain because it's not one thing, it's the whole dynamic. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. When you can't pinpoint the problem in the relationship, you assume the relationship must be the problem. When you can't pinpoint the problem in the relationship, you assume the relationship must be the problem. And if a relationship feels broken, the only solution seems like leaving. But do we sometimes give up simply because we don't know how to fix it? This struggle is timeless, even appearing in one of the most famous romances of the Old Testament in the Bible, which begins not with a fairy tale, but with a recently divorced king in need of a queen. And we pick up the story in Esther chapter 2, verse 2. This is what it says. So his personal attendants, the king's personal attendants, suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Jump to verse 4. It says, after that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. No, duh, it's appealing to the king. Right? Some of you are like, man, that just seems so dated and archaic. When I look at that, it just sounds like The Bachelor to me. Jump to verses 16 and 17. This is what it says. It says, Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter, the 7th year of his reign. Verse 17, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. And so it was a dream come true. Right? He loved Esther far more than just for her beauty. Right? He admired her confidence. He admired her intelligence and the grace that she lived with. And so he made her queen, valuing her wit and her leadership and everything that he saw in her that he loved. But then Esther's uncle, because it's always an uncle. It's always the uncle, right? He urges Esther to use now her position to approach the king and to say, hey, can you talk to and plead with the king to protect our people? And this is what Esther says, Esther 4, verse 11. She says, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. Isn't that odd that the king has not called for the queen to come and spend time with him for 30 days? What that tells us is things are not what they used to be like. That there is distance between Esther and her husband, right? And between chapters 2 and 4 in the book of Esther, the dynamic seems to shift abruptly, reflecting the common reality of relationships that may start blissfully but slowly strain over time. We've all been in the honeymoon phase, right? And we all know when the honeymoon phase comes to an end, right? Maybe it's like, it feels like that third wall breaks in your relationship, right? And you see that person in a way that you never thought you would. Or do they say something or they do something that you never thought they would do, and now that kind of that wall is broken and it's like reality starts to set in. That's every single relationship, including Esther and her husband. And so meanwhile, her uncle Mordecai rises in power and unknowingly stirs jealousy in Haman, who's one of the king's top advisors. He then finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, and this is what he says, Esther 3, verse 8. It says, "Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, 'There is a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live.'" And so if we wanted to be just honest, he manipulates the king, and the king actually agrees with him. And the king tells Haman to do whatever he needs to do to get rid of those who are rebelling. Look at what verse 13a says. It says, "Dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day." Now, here's what's interesting to me. Esther only learns of the crisis when her uncle encourages her to intervene, but her husband, he's been overwhelmed with stress. He's been absent for 30 days. He's known for his temper, and so maybe she's afraid to confront him, knowing that it can make him feel deceived and embarrassed at its core. I think their struggle is actually deeply relatable to maybe many of the relationships in this room, right? Life's pressure, which is inevitable and unavoidable, and stress have pulled them apart. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. When we're stressed, not only do we not have time for each other, we don't always treat each other well. When we're stressed, it's not that we don't have time for each other, but we also don't really treat each other well. See, stress brings out these animalistic and automatic reactions in us, and we start to slip into survival mode. And these two, Esther and King Xerxes, they know each other's default responses by heart, likely ones that you're familiar with. There's 3 of them: flight, fight, or freeze. And that's the other thing I find so interesting. You may know exactly how your spouse responds when they're stressed, and yet we still haven't figured out how to actually manage and serve one another in the midst of that stress. But usually it's the other way around. Our stress is managing and dictating us. One author assigns flight, fight, or freeze each an animal metaphor, which I think is a little bit more helpful. If the flight response is represented by a deer, right? And that's where you seek escape, feeling restless and wanting to avoid the situation. The fight response is symbolized by a cobra, where anger leads you to lash out, argue, and intimidate. The opossum is what embodies the freeze response, shutting down in fear and becoming invisible to avoid worsening things. And in our story, King Xerxes is a cobra, and Esther has always been a deer. King Xerxes never backs down, and Esther always runs away. Neither of them has any clue about what's going on with the other, the weight they're carrying, or how heavy it actually feels for them. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. They're each interacting with each other out of their stress, but don't talk to each other about their stress. And there's a big difference. They're reacting to each other out of their stress, but they're not talking about their stress. And this is the reality for so many couples. Most of us don't fully understand all that our spouse is carrying and how much each of those things stress them out. And I want us to think about this in this way. If this sled represents your relationship, maybe it represents your marriage, here's how this plays out, right? One of the things that I've learned since having a kid and kind of navigating some things is there is a weight and a burden that mothers carry that men will never understand. And it's so heavy that when I try to get Tess to like explain it, she can't even really verbalize it. It's just like, I don't know what to tell you, but I don't stop thinking about it. I don't stop thinking about him. I don't stop thinking about our family. Even when I'm gone, I don't stop thinking about it. And for me, I know it's not the same because when I'm playing golf, I ain't thinking about my son. Just to be very honest. Thinking about that next swing, okay? And so here's what I'm learning though, right? So what happens and how this looks is Tess has got this mental load that maybe, women carry the child. So it's a little bit different, right? So there's just this burden and this weight that comes with that. And so if we're not talking about it, it just kind of ends up on our marriage. And it's unavoidable, right? It's unavoidable. Now, for Tess, she's not kind of in this day to day. And so there's some things that if I'm not talking about it, that are stressing me out when it comes to work that she may not know about if I'm not talking about it. And growing up in my house, we didn't really talk about things, right? So for me, my default, when we talk about those four things, is my default is to just kind of withdraw and isolate. And so the weight doesn't not come, it doesn't, because I'm not talking about it, it doesn't end up on our marriage. It's still there, right? The other thing is like there's small things, right? Because I think we all acknowledge that the big life moments when an unexpected illness comes or, you get that massive bill out of nowhere, those things are inevitable and those are major stressors. But I think the thing that we got to start to manage is the daily stressors, right? The things that are just day-to-day, unavoidable, right? And so one of the things that I realize is Tess is at home when our son's not at school. She's at home a lot more than I am. And so one of the things that she does, it's a part of her rhythm, and great, I don't think she really wants me to do it every week because I really can't cook, but she plans what we're eating the whole week. And it's amazing. And I've never really thought about how much time it took, but I knew that, man, like that's a mental load that's probably weighing on her, and that came up in a conversation. And so 2 weeks ago, I said, you know what, I'm gonna pick some recipes, I'm gonna make them to the best of my ability. She may not like it, but it's the thought that counts. I'm just trying to take that load off, right? But if we're not talking about it, the weight that she's feeling and carrying of something that seems so day-to-day doesn't go away, right? And then I think about what we've been doing the last 3 weeks here. For me and my staff, their other jobs don't stop, right? They're just figuring out how to do everything else in the midst of us choosing to open up this building, and they're along for the ride and we're along for the ride, but nothing else stops. And so there is an added weight and heaviness that comes that if we're not talking about it, it's gonna show up in our relationships. And here's what we do. Here's what we tend to do. We're not talking about it like Esther and Xerxes, but it's there. And here's what's happening. Josh, I need you. Come on. Here's what's happening. So this is our relationship. Here's all the crap we're carrying. It's heavy, right? And we're supposed to kind of, it's a together thing, right? It's not one or the other, right? When you get married, my stress is your stress. Your stress is my stress, right? And so we're supposed to move through life together. But here's what we do. When we're not talking about it, this is what we do. I'm frustrated. I'm tired. You don't know. So you're going to push until I tell you to stop, because that's what it's supposed to be like, right? Now, that's what happens. And for most of us, whether you're the one choosing to sit or you're the one pushing, neither of you are right. It was never intended to work like that. And again, it's not the major things, it's the minor things. And if we can get the minor things right, the major things will feel minor. It was a together thing. And notice that this is such a common problem that New Testament authors, you can stay here, New Testament authors, we're not done yet. New Testament authors frequently challenge us to do the opposite of what we usually do, right? Galatians 6:2, this is what it says. It says, share each other's burdens, and in this way, obey the law of Christ. Now, it's almost impossible to help someone carry a burden they've never fully shared with you. That's why it's important. You got to start talking about what's weighing you down, what's stressing you out, the weight that you're carrying. The same author writes this in Ephesians 4:15-16. He says, instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. Verse 16, he makes the whole body fit together perfectly as each part does its own special work. Can I tell you, oh my gosh, I am learning this. That if you want to have a healthy relationship, there's some work you got to do on your own. Even after you're married. Like there are things that are maybe kind of strained in your relationship, not because it involves the both of you, but maybe it's you guys individually doing the work on your own so that when you come together, you guys are in a better headspace. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, right? So when you do the work on yourself, it will inevitably help your relationship grow. That's what it says, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. And the first step is honesty, sharing the truth and listening to others. And this openness helps us understand how to complement and support each other, lowering stress and reflecting Jesus's example. Shouldering everything alone is not how Jesus created us to live. And notice that the Bible, it speaks to how we manage stress, not how we eliminate it. There's nothing in the Bible that says, if you pray this prayer, God will take all your stress away. But there's a whole lot of insight about how we manage the things that are weighing us down. That's because stress is unavoidable, and being in a relationship means signing up for a lifetime of stressors for each other. Most of us, though, we just spin through our wheels trying to shield each other from our stress. Research shows how couples handle the daily minor stressors, predicts how they'll cope with bigger challenges. In other words, if you're taking notes, write this down. The success of any relationship is reliant on the ability to manage minor stressors. And psychologists have given them a term to describe the weight of managing these things. It's called mental load, right? The mental load is the invisible, non-tangible task required to run day-to-day life. It's the things that just, what are we going to eat this week? Who's going grocery shopping? Right? Who's dropping the kids off? Who's picking them up? It's all of those things. There's 4 things I want to give you when it comes to mental load. The first is remembering, knowing what and when everything needs to get done. I can tell you, I'm terrible at that one. I forget everything. Tess remembers everything. The second is researching. Right? Finding out the best way to get everything that you need to get done. The third is worrying, right? Understanding the consequences of not getting it done. And lastly, delegating, assigning tasks and following up to make sure that it gets done. And I wonder, when was the last time you and your partner discussed the mental load that each of you carries? Not to argue, but to truly understand each other's pressures and stress. Because without this conversation, you're going to end up in a cycle of accusations and defenses, making it hard to address the real issue. And it's important because if you're taking notes, here's our big idea today. Happy relationships are the result of healthy stress management. Happy relationships are the result of healthy stress management. And when we do it right, this is what it was always intended to be, right? It's not just one person carrying the whole load. Right, but man, we gotta do this together. And so it's not just Josh pushing, although I would love to let him push, but it's like, no, I got you. I'm gonna do my part too. I got you. Yeah, let's do it. We got it. That's what it was always intended to be. Now, I'm gonna take it a step further, right? Because Maybe you're in the room and you would say, you know what, I'm here. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you, brother. Hey, he has a great gym, conquer all things. But here's the thing. Like, if you're in this room, or maybe you're watching online and you don't believe in Jesus, you're on a journey yet still, I want to challenge you, because I think it's not just about learning how to manage your individual stress together well, but it's also inviting Jesus into that. And here's what that can look like, right? You learn how to do it together, so you're not reacting out of your stress, but you're talking about it and you're carrying that weight together. And what Jesus, out of his kindness and his grace and his mercy, what he does in certain seasons, he says, you know what? You guys are moving a lot. You guys are carrying a lot. And here's what I want to do. I'm just going to take this. I'm not going to get rid of it, but I'm going to hold it for you. Because I want you guys to keep moving in the direction that you're moving. And you know what? I see that you just had a baby, so that baby's going to be sitting on top of that. So let me take one of those for you, and I'm gonna carry it with you. Right? He's not just the feeling of peace, he is peace. And I believe that we can experience health and peace in our relationships if we learn to manage our stress, not alone, but together in a healthy way. And we invite Jesus into that process with us. Man, if you are worried about where your relationship is right now, if you are like, there's no way it's gonna get better, can I just encourage you that your relationship does not have to stay where it's at? That it can change. But that change starts with you choosing to change. And so here's what the challenge is for all of us this week. It's to identify the mental load you're each carrying and which items stress you the most. And so find a time to sit down, to calmly, this week, understand each other's mental load without judgment, right? You can practice that TikTok trend. We listen and we don't judge. Just say that, right? Before you say what you're stressed out about, just drop that line in there. We listen and we don't judge, right? But this conversation, I think, can help uncover things that maybe your spouse just hasn't been able to communicate, but it's stressing them out and it's weighing them down. And it's an opportunity to create compassion for one another and allow you to share responsibilities, lightening each other's load. As the worship team comes back to join me, when this is not addressed, it often can erupt emotionally, especially when one partner reaches their breaking point. And fairness, not equality, is key in a balanced partnership. Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, it says it this way. It says, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. And I think relationships fall apart when someone feels like, I'm not sure the two of us is better than me all by myself. Because when I feel overwhelmed, I can't reach out to you for help. I feel alone in my stress. And the fact that you don't notice or do notice but aren't willing to help makes me want to leave. But your relationship doesn't have to be like that. And as we move through the rest of the series, we're going to give all of us the tools to help each other grow and have healthier relationships. And again, I know we're looking at this through the lens of marriage or romantic relationships, but I think everything that we talked about can kind of transcend to friendships, right? It can work when it comes to parent-kid relationships. It can, like all of these things that we talked about, we experience all those things in all the different relationships that we have. And so maybe for you, it's having a conversation with your parent, your mom and your dad, and saying, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about the things that are stressing me out, things that are stressing you out, because I want our relationship to grow. I want it to get better. Maybe as a parent, it's you choosing to sit down with your kid to have that conversation. And look, you got to have it at the right time. I'm terrible when it comes to the timing of conversations, right? I get home from work, the last thing I want to do is talk to anybody, and because I'm an introvert, and so I usually just kind of be with my son, be with my family, and then when we get in bed, that's when I want to have the conversation. It drives Tess crazy, Like literally, we're in bed, under the covers, and I look over and I ask her a question. She's like, really? Now you want to talk? It's like, well, I just thought it would be a great time, even though we're in the dark. So you got to make sure it's the right time. But I think you can have these conversations with whatever relationship you're trying to kind of add health to. And but my hope is that, man, by the end of this month, that you see some sort of movement in the right direction when it comes to the relationship that you want to grow. And so can I invite you to stand? I want to pray for us, and then we're going to practice leaving slowly this morning. Jesus, we love you. We thank you for who you are. We thank you for what you've done and what you're doing. And Jesus, we pray that right now, as we take a moment to pause and to reflect, that maybe you would speak to us about the relationship that we need to do the work in. Maybe it's our marriage, maybe it's with our kids, maybe it's with our friends, maybe it's with a coworker, maybe it's somebody else in our family. You know what it is, and I pray, would you just make it clear to us, and would you, as you make it clear to us, would you give us the courage to do what we know we need to do, which is maybe reaching out and setting up a time to say, hey, I would love to talk about, without judgment, the things that are stressing you out that I may not know about, and vice versa, because I want to help carry the weight, because we weren't created to carry those things on our own. And so would you speak to us right now? Fill us with strength and courage and boldness.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.